Hello everyone. I wanted to put together a quick little video continuing to talk about this chapter on learning and memory and focus on the facet of memory as it relates to consumer behavior. Because if a consumer cannot remember a given product, then it doesn't really matter what happens. If there is no memory of a good or service, then all is lost. It really truly is. So let's begin talking about this if we can. I want to start off by talking about sort of the theory of how we commit things to memory. Now, there are different theories out there as to how this is done, but I want to go with more of a traditional theory because it does explain a lot of how we market to people. And when it comes to committing something to memory, there is this one theory we refer to as the PDP, the Parallel Distributing Processing Model. I didn't put the name up there because you really don't need to worry about the name Parallel Distributing Processing Model. But basically, this is how it works. When it comes to committing anything to memory, the first thing that has to happen is that your senses pick up on it. Okay, your senses pick up on information. And so it enters what this theory calls the sensory memory or sensory register of your brain. Now, the sensory memory, therefore, is the initial component of which information enters into your mind through your senses. Information doesn't stay in sensory memory, but for just a couple of seconds, and if even that much, depending upon the circumstance. Takes in a lot of sensory input, but you don't hold on to very much. The vast majority of what you hear, what you see, what you smell, and so on is forgotten. And if it's not worth holding on to, no, then it's lost. Doesn't mean you can't get it back later, but for now it's lost. Okay? If you do pay attention to something, and something is worth remembering, okay, you pay attention to it, then it ends up in what we call your short-term memory. Your short-term memory, which is also known as your working memory, there is a little bit of a difference between the two concepts, but for now I'm going to bring them together. Short-term memory is your working memory. And the working memory or short-term memory can hold on to things you're focusing on for the moment. Now, two quick things I want to tell you here that's not on the slide. The typical capacity, how many bits of information you can hold in short-term memory, is about 7 bits of information for adults. It's less for children, but for adults it's about 7 bits, give or take 2. So I could say 5 to 9 pieces of information, with 7 being about the average. All right? You can get better, you can rehearse, you can practice and increase your memory, but that's what we typically do. Without practice, 7 bits. All right? Also, how long do things stay in short-term memory? Well, without practice, no more than about 10 to 20 seconds. So the duration is no more than, say, 20 seconds. Some books will tell you less. Some books will tell you more. I want you to know about 20 seconds. 7 bits of information is average what you hold for about 20 seconds. If something is not worth holding on to, okay, you don't hold on to it, then once again, it's lost. But if you do pay attention to something and it seems important enough, then what happens is it will go from short-term memory to long-term memory. Okay, and so what you have here is long-term memory, and ideally things could potentially stay in long-term memory a lifetime. We don't know how much you can put in there, but this is the general process. This is how things typically work. You pick up something through your senses. If you pay attention to it, it may go to your short-term memory. If you feel it necessary and put some effort into it, it can go into your long-term memory. So you need to know these 3 things because they're very, very important in understanding some of the stuff I'm about to talk about. One of the most important things in there is short-term memory. So how do we increase short-term memory? Okay, how do we make it better? Well, one thing that we can do is what is referred to as chunking. Chunking is a way of increasing short-term memory, possibly beyond that 7 bits of information. What you do when you chunk information together is you take large sets of information and you organize them into smaller bits. Okay? When you listen to someone, if they I know a lot of people anymore don't seem to know their phone numbers. I come from an era where basically you had to write them down or rattle them off. Now you just call your friend, and all you have to remember is your number. Then they have your number when you call them. But when you think of a phone number, and I'll use my office phone number as an example, it's 7 digits long. It is 4478251. Most people, when they go through that number, they don't turn around and reel it off, or I wouldn't reel it off as 7 continuous digits. I would break it into 2 sets. See, that's what chunking is breaking information into smaller sets. I may say 447 and pause for a second, and then I say 8251. That way, instead of having 7 digits, I turn around and I have 2 sets instead. 2 sets is easier to remember than 7 digits. If I have to give my phone number to someone who is far away and does not live in the 417 area code, I could go 417-447-8251. That's 10 digits. That's outside the norm. Or I can break it into 3 sets: 417, 447, 8251. That makes it a little easier to remember. So that is the idea behind chunking. Anytime you can organize information into sets, it makes it easier to recall. Then there's what are called positioning effects. Positioning effects are all about the idea that where you put information is going to influence if it is remembered. I say that again. Where you put information is going to influence if it's remembered or not. Okay? Think about a lot of commercials that you might see on the television. What do? At the beginning of a lot of ads, they turn around and start with a setting. Okay? You see a picture of the surroundings, what's going on in a given commercial. And then you go through the meat of what the commercial is all about. And a lot of times, the very last thing in that 30-second commercial is the emblem of the company: Walmart or Target or Microsoft or something else, Nike. They finish with that. It's all about where you put information. Where you put information can influence the chance and how well it's remembered. There is what is called a primacy effect. The primacy effect says that what occurs first tends to be better remembered. If you've ever heard the phrase first impressions, it's all about first impressions. Well, that's based off the premise that people tend to remember what happens first. Okay? There's also what is known as a recency effect. And the recency effect says that what occurs most recent, or what occurs last, tends to be remembered. So if you show an ad with all that's going on, and at the very end of the ad you put up there that emblem of Microsoft, okay, or Budweiser beer, or Pepsi, or Coca-Cola, or some company, like I said, like Kohl's or Best Buy, that's what you remember. What a lot of companies do is they cover their bases. They create a good beginning and they create a good end. They cover the primacy and the recency. They make sure they've got good, strong enablers, something to catch your attention at both points. Now, overall, which is better? Do people tend to remember what happens first, primacy, or last? In consumer psychology, the research tends to indicate that what occurs last is more apt to be placed in long-term memory than what occurs first. So guess what? Recency wins out. All right. That doesn't mean that primacy doesn't have a place. It's just that recency wins out. Okay. All right. Sensory memory to short-term memory to long-term memory. How do you get information from your current working memory and get it stored into long-term memory? There's a couple of ways to do this. First of all, we rely in consumer marketing on repetition. Think of all the ads that you've seen where basically what they do is they repeat something. Okay, I jokingly say Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. They repeat that over and over again so that it catches your attention and hopefully you remember the date. Okay, so repetition can affect the ability of information going from short-term to long-term memory. All right, but there's something else that's important to repetition, and that is how involved is the consumer with the product. How involved is the consumer with the product? This really matters an awful lot. The amount of repetition you will use in an ad depends upon how much your consumer knows about a given product, knows about what it is you're talking about. Okay, so if you have a product out there that has low levels of involvement, okay, your customers don't know about it, they don't know about the product, the goods, the services, and so on, then when it comes to the amount of repetition you're going to have to put in your ads, it's going to have to be higher to get them to pay attention. That's how it works. Lower involvement results in higher repetition so that you get it into long-term memory. If you have customers who know an awful lot about a product, they know about the product, they know details about the product, they use the product a lot, you don't need as much repetition to get them to remember it. They've already got it there. Continuous repetition, it really is not necessary for recall if the customer is truly I'm sorry, interested in the product. Okay, so keep that in mind. Lower involvement requires higher repetition, and higher involvement, consumer involvement, usually results in less need for repetition. All right. We also speak of a concept called state-dependent memory. I should make note that this is also known as context-dependent memory to some people. State-dependent memory, context-dependent memory, same thing. State-dependent memory or context-dependent memory says that we tend to remember things best in the place or the context we learned them. Imagine turning around and watching a movie that catches your eye, and maybe it's many months, maybe years before you see the movie again. But you're thrust back into that environment where you're watching this movie over, and what happens? You suddenly realize at a given point of the movie, you know what the next scene is. You know what the person's going to say. You're back in that situation, and so it comes back to you. I also use this example. People turn around and walk out of their room, their bedroom, their living room. They go into another room and they go, what did I come in here for? They forget. Now, it's not the forgetting part that is the problem. It's that they go back to where they learned it and it comes back to them. That's state-dependent memory. You recall things best in the place or the context that you learned it. Now, what some companies are doing, such as Walmart, is Walmart did for a while there, and they don't do it as much as they had before, is they had the big smiley face. And they would put the big smiley face in a lot of ads, all right? It was animated, it bounced around, the people talked to it. You saw the smiley face. It created evoked a positive emotion about Walmart. So what occurs? You go to the store, and a lot of these Walmart employees at one time had vests that had the big smiley face. It reminded you of the company. It reminded you of the feeling when you saw the ad, and you're seeing it again. I'm going to remind you of that and hopefully increase the likelihood that you're going to turn around and buy the product in question. All right. So what factors influence consumer memory? Okay, some of these may seem pretty obvious, but maybe a few of these you weren't aware of. For example, the age of the consumer. Very simply put, the older we become, all right, the poorer the recall of whatever the product is and what it does. If you get into marketing and you're marketing to what we would call the older demographic, okay, the silver demographic, as some people call it because of the color of the hair, or the gray market, I've heard it called that too. Your ads have to have more repetition. You have to do them more often to get people to even show the ad more often to get your older consumer to pay attention and to remember what it is. All right? So the older we become, the poorer the recall. We also speak of what are called pioneering brands. Pioneering brands are new products, okay? Pioneering brands are products that really have no competition whatsoever, all right? And because of this, they're better remembered than similar products that follow. Now, I don't know if you know what I have pictured there, but these are new Amazon buttons. Who knows? Maybe they've been out for a while and only I'm realizing them now. But these are buttons you can actually turn around. They have a computer chip in them and Wi-Fi connectivity that when you run out of, say, Tide dish soap, you can press the button, and if you have the account set up on Amazon, it just automatically orders it. You don't have to do more. Or Gatorade, or Glad trash bags, or Bounty dryer sheets, or something like that, or Huggies, or Gillette. Uh, this is a pioneering brand, okay? And these are better remembered than the similar products that may someday follow, all right? So pioneering brands tend to be better remembered. They're a good example of what we would call the primacy effect, and that works to your advantage. Salience and recall. Salience refers to how well we recall something. Salience is all about how well we recall something, okay? And we tend to recall things best when we pay attention to them, all right? And what do we tend to pay attention to? Oh, things that contrast, things that are outside the norm. So when it comes to salience and recall, we tend to pay attention to things that catch our attention. Doesn't always mean we buy them, but we pay more attention to them. For example, we talk about what are called pictorial cues, and verbal cues. Sort of leads into this. Um, contrast ads, ads that contrast the norm are good for salience, but pictorial ads can work as well. Picture ads, studies find this. Picture ads have better memory recall than audio ads. Visual ads are better than audio ads, okay? But picture ads, pictorial ads, do not necessarily offer better understanding of the product. If you see a Chromebook here by Google Chrome, all right, you may know what it is when you see it, but that doesn't mean you necessarily know all that it can do. So pictorial ads will increase the memory, but it will not necessarily increase the understanding. So something worth noting there, okay? And then finally, probably the worst thing that could possibly happen, I mean, it really is a terrible thing to advertisers, is that your consumer forgets. Okay? This is horrible. If your consumer forgets your product, or they think that it belongs to somebody else. They don't even realize. Okay? It's actually horrible, to be quite honest with you. You're selling things and people don't remember them. So the question here is, why do we forget? Why do we forget? Well, there are some different theories out there, and probably the best theory relevant to all this consumer marketing is what's called interference theory. The reason you sometimes don't remember about a given product is that other products sort of interfere, they get in the way. Okay? It's a question of the original product, maybe you created, versus newer products, other companies trying to create something to follow you in line, and what ends up being more effective in that regard. Interference, okay? Let me explain. There is what we call proactive interference. Proactive interference says that what we learn first interferes with what we learn more recently, okay? What we learn first interferes with what we learn more recently. Therefore, with proactive interference, what we learn first may be the original product, and it interferes with our ability to remember something we've learned more recently, a newer product. If you go to the store and you know about a particular product, all right, and you hear about something new, and what happens? You end up buying the original stuff. Well, didn't you get the newer version? Didn't you get this alternative? Oh no, I only thought of this one. I saw that and I grabbed it. That is proactive interference. What you learned first got in the way of what you learned later. With retroactive interference, what is learned more recent interferes with what is learned first. So maybe you hear about some of the newer products, the newer types of soda pop. Coca-Cola comes out with some new new flavors and things like that, and someone turns around and tells you, go get some original soda, Coca-Cola, and what do you end up doing? You end up buying one of the newer flavors instead. That can have an impact as well. It really, truly can. All right. So what can we do to diminish the chance of a consumer forgetting? This is very, very important. The biggest thing is what is called salience, increasing salience. Increasing salience simply means that you make your product name more salient. You make it stand out of the norm, be outside of the norm. It's got to be something that catches a person's attention. I've got some older examples here, but they still work. The company known as Xerox. Xerox is sort of one that's you tend to remember if you get into the business world because it's spelled Xerox. Such an out of the ordinary spelling, you tend to remember what the product is all about. You turn around and you think of something, you could say what is called 3M. They make a lot of post-it notes, they make tape, they make everything. But do you know that 3M actually stands for Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing? Okay, or Minnesota Manufacturing and Mining. That's too big a name. Nobody would remember that. So they created the name 3M, and it stands out. If a company comes up with something, a name that stands out from its original name so that you remember it, that's what we're talking about here. So, all right, folks, I hope that turns around and gives you some information on how memory works, how people forget, what makes people remember, and ways to help people better remember. Keep up the great work. Take care.